The Claiming of Grimmauld Place by bixgirl1. Summary. When Grimmauld Place begins fighting against Harry's ownership of it, he decides he needs help to train the historic home. But little does he expect that it will be Malfoy who's most suitable for the challenge. However, as Malfoy and Harry get closer, Harry comes to understand that expectations aren't always the best path by which to guide his heart, and in the process learns just what is needed to make a house a home. A Drarry fanfiction. Chapter 1. The Arrangement. Searching for stable wizarding housemaid. Will have private room, bath, and full access to common areas. Can negotiate a discount on rent if you have experience training generational wizarding homes. Home comes with house elf. Please respond to Albox 2837. Harry stared dismally at the missive covering Ron's coffee table and accepted a beer Ron offered.
"Help me with this,"
he said plaintively.
"You think I want in on that mess?"
Ron asked, sitting down next to him and gesturing to the mayor with his own bottle before taking a drink.
"I think you'll get in on this mess because you'll be seeing whoever moves in all the time,"
Harry said grimly, picking up a small pile and shoving it at him.
"I didn't realize this many people needed a housemaid." "Hermione!"
Ron called out suddenly. Harry jumped, then took a swig of his beer to settle down, surprisingly edgy about this whole debacle.
"Come in here and do the hard work for us."
"No, do it yourself," she yelled back from the kitchen over the sound of Ginny's laughter.
"Wish Ginny would just move in,"
Harry muttered. He sifted through the disorganized mess in front of him and picked one up at random.
"Grimmauld Place has too many noggles for Luna."
Ron's knee nudged his, and Harry looked up to see him discard an opened reply.
"Anyway, you and Gin drive each other crazy when you're in close quarters for too long,"
he added with a shudder. Grimacing, Harry acknowledged the point. He and Ginny might still have tried to give things a go, despite everything else, if there was any way to live with someone without being reminded of their constant presence. Their temporary cohabitation a year after the war had not gone well, even after they had decided to just be friends. "You're too similar," Hermione's voice reminded him in his head. "You need a run. Someone who complements you."
"But you guys grew up in a wizarding house,"
Harry said. It was a pointless argument, and they both knew it.
"Preacher says Grimmauld Place needs someone who did. Someone who cares about that crap. Mom and Dad built the burrow from scratch. All the magic that's in it is a result of spells anyway. You need generations to sort the kind of shit that goes on at your place. Sell it,"
Ron advised flatly, eye skimming another piece of mail.
"It's awful, and you know... Hey, this one sounds pretty good."
He handed it over.
"They have 5 kids."
Harry tossed it aside.
"Can you imagine what the house would do to one pet that got on its nerve?"
Sounding marginally more sympathetic, Ron leaned back against the sofa and unfolded more mail.
"It's not getting better." "It's getting worse," Harry said. "It locked me out of all the bathrooms last night. In the middle of the night, Ron."
Harry said pointedly when Ron sniggered.
"I had to piss in the garden. Paul kept staring. They complimented my dick. Then he threw a rock at me."
Ron laughed harder, and Harry elbowed him, trying not to smile. Though he wasn't exactly sure how he felt about rooming with a married couple, he placed the response in the possible pile, which consisted of only one other reply, and picked up a new one.
"You could always find a flat."
Ron's laughter died abruptly at his own suggestion, voice turning somber. Harry looked at him, surprised.
"I'm serious, Harry. You could come stay with me and Hermione while you look for your own place. Grimmauld."
He hesitated.
"It's not a happy place to be."
"I know," Harry said with a sigh. He rubbed a hand over his face. It wasn't as if he'd never thought about it, especially since the only thing he'd managed to do to cheer up the place was get rid of that damned portrait of a bulk on the wall.
"But serious." "I know."
Ron pressed Harry's knee again, sympathetic.
But you can't spend your life trying to fix up a tomb to honor Sirius. Even he didn't like it there. No, but it meant something to him, or he wouldn't have left it to me,
Harry said tiredly. Didn't like saying it. It felt childish and petty, but unlike Ron, he had so little to remember his family by. And Sirius, for as short a time as Harry had known him, had given him something. He couldn't ignore it. He looked down at a semi-decent response. Could it be so bad to give up an extra room for Butterby or home brewery, and set it in the possible pile that seemed determined not to grow? Ron remained silent, countenance worried. Harry shook his head.
If this doesn't work, I'll consider options, yeah? But in the meantime, stop stalling.
Ron relaxed a bit. He rolled his eyes and grunted, opening up another letter. He snorted.
Oh, I like how half of these ask if they can take over the whole house for their hobbies. How do you feel about making a room for BDSM dungeon? Already have one,
Harry said absently, then grinned.
Though they mention if they're single.
Ron groaned.
Better not joke with them about that. Merlin knows what kind of housemaid you'll attract when people find out they're going to be yours. Speaking of which, remind me to call Kingsley and get permission to use memory charms if any of the interviews go badly,
Harry said thoughtfully. He made a face and crumpled up a reply. No, he did not want to consider that creepy request about creature services. Thank you very much.
I don't think I'll need to. If I ever make it to the interview stage, people have got to be better than this lot. But it can't hurt to have them, right?
People were not, in fact, better at the interview stage. Out of the dozen people Harry had interviewed, he had to obliviate 5 what seemed just normal enough to make it past the initial meeting to be invited to take a look around Grimmauld Place. Most of them had figured out his identity immediately upon learning the address, despite the heavily crafted glamours he wore, which had been problematic enough. 2 of them had followed his movements with such avidly bright gazes that he'd known he'd never feel comfortable showering if they lived there. One person had tried to nick a framed picture of him, Hermione and Ron. Another had yelled at Creature and told Harry with a lofty smile that was what house elves liked. And even those had been better than the last horrifying incident, when a witch of about 40, who had seemed almost normal, but for a vague, musty odour of mothballs with the foreboding astringent tone of ammonia underneath, had confessed that she had been raised muggle, but would be willing to work off a break in the rent by other means. She then began calmly removing her robes, as if the matters had been settled. In retrospect, Harry felt a little bad about having panic-stunned her, but gave a mental shrug. At least she wouldn't remember it. And these had been the candidates he'd been hopeful about. He sighed, scrubbing a hand over his tired face. He only had 2 other possibles before going back to the drawing board. He stirred his tea idly and looked down at the response in his hand. The perfect scrolling cursive fascinated him a little, but the content was less than completely forthcoming. I am very interested in the room, and was born and raised in a generational wizarding home. I believe we can come to terms to help one another. Please respond to our box 144 to set up an appointment, and I shall make myself available. Harry didn't quite know if it was good or bad thing that the applicant hadn't included their name or age or request to have a floating water pit in his sitting room. It was just void of context, which probably would have worried him more if not for Margaret, the aspiring prostitute, and the rest. Antsy for all this to be over with, Harry went to check the time again and heard the tinkling sound of the charms over Fortescue's door as someone entered. He looked up, mind going blank, as Draco Malfoy came in. He looked different than the last time he had seen him, just after the trials. Though still tall and skinny, he somewhat now resembled the Malfoy Harry remembered before the war. Healthy skin, having lost that yellowish pallor of someone who'd been in a containment cell for a month. There was something else too, Harry thought, studying him, maybe an ease in his own skin. Something Harry couldn't put his finger on. Cut his hair and wore it swept to the side and tousled now. Harry noted with some surprise. It was a good look on him. Hurriedly closing his mouth before he was caught gaping, Harry took a sip of tea for something to do. Malfoy's unsettling grey eyes landed on him, and he seemed to hesitate before striding over and taking a seat across from Harry at the small table he'd procured. Harry jerked, body going rigid and eyes rounding as he realized that Malfoy was here to see him. After too long beat, he recovered and decided to brazen it out.
"Hi, Potter,"
Malfoy said flatly.
"Shh,"
Harry hissed, looking around. Reassured no one seemed to have overheard, he leaned back in his chair and examined Malfoy closely.
"How do you know it was me?"
Malfoy shrugged, adopting Harry's posture. Picked up the menu with one hand and scanned it absently before setting it back down and taking a breath.
"The picture in your advert,"
he finally said.
"I didn't put a picture of myself in the advert,"
Harry said, confused.
"No, you put one of the sitting room at Grimmauld Place."
Malfoy said with a twitch of his lips.
"Which had more than one of my relatives on the wall. The fact that your glamour is shoddily done is just a bonus. You could have at least adjusted the style of your spectacles."
Stumped for a response, Harry stared at him for a moment.
"Oh, then you're really him, the applicant?"
Malfoy blinked at him slowly.
"You can't imagine you get someone who's better equipped to train a black family estate home."
He paused, that sly curl twitching his mouth again. Harry forced himself to look away.
"Although I'll admit to being surprised that you need help with anything."
Harry flushed.
"I have dozens and dozens of applicants, Malfoy."
He lied.
"What makes you think I'd ever pick you?"
Took another sip of his tea, eyeing Malfoy over the rim of his cup. Malfoy looked distressingly unbothered.
"Because whatever problem you're having, I can help fix, and you know it,"
he said, arching one brow. He looked down and picked off an invisible piece of lint from his pristine turquoise robes.
"It should be fine. You testified for me. You obviously don't hate me any longer." "Is that what you got from that?"
Harry asked. Malfoy's eyes started up to his flickering inscrutably before swerving away. Harry sighed.
"Why would you even want to live with me?"
he asked plaintively. At that, Malfoy straightened a touch, narrow shoulders squaring.
"I think it'd be obvious, Mark,"
Harry supplied quietly. Malfoy snorted.
"Mark?"
Rolling his eyes, he leaned forward.
"You must have some concept of what it's like for someone who—"
He cleared his throat.
"For me, the last 3 years haven't exactly been a game of pick-up Quidditch, socially speaking, but once it gets out that I'm housing with the savior of the wizarding world."
He trailed off suggestively. Harry smirked.
"That's it then. You want to live with me because it will make you look good?"
He shook his head, an absurd bubble of laughter caught in his throat.
"You don't have any friends anymore, so you want to trade on the reputation of being one of mine? Once is other and always one, right, Malfoy?"
Malfoy looked annoyed.
"You say that as if it's a bad thing."
He sniffed.
"And I have friends. Unfortunately, most of them are as unwelcome in many exclusive establishments as I am. We all try to kill me and or trade me over to be killed,"
Harry supplied, voice smart. He raised his eyebrows. Malfoy fell silent, and a flush climbed above the high collar of his robe, in stark contrast to his creamy skin. Harry watched it with a sense of gleeful satisfaction. He had not often gotten to see Malfoy so off-kilter he was without words.
"Made mistakes, I was going to say,"
he muttered after a moment. He looked equal parts furious and embarrassed, and Harry decided to ease off a little. He didn't actually want to provoke Malfoy into stalking away. At least not yet.
"How would people even know?" Harry asked. "That you were living with me, I mean. I tend to keep to myself, you know. I've got wards around Grimmauld that keep away reporters and photographers, and I certainly don't give interviews, so how would people even find out?"
Malfoy paused, then grinned, wide and smug and surprising.
I would make sure they did, he said simply.
Harry muttered noncommittently. He stirred his tea a few more times. It was getting cold, and felt Malfoy's gaze on him, practically willing him to say yes. He hummed for another second and tapped his chin with his forefinger, just to be annoying, then finally looked back up. Malfoy's lower lip was swollen and slightly pink, as though he'd just released it from between his teeth. Harry shrugged.
Do you want to see the house? Well, I'm certainly not paying you to live here,
Malfoy said disdainfully after the tourist creature brought them a fruit and cheese tray. He chose a fat grape from the offerings and popped it into his mouth, looking bored.
Thank you, creature.
Creature bowed low, dignified, but apparently too overcome to speak.
You're not interested, then?
Harry clarified after a pause. His heart spat up for no reason he could discern.
I didn't say that. My reasoning still applies, Malfoy said slowly. But really, Potter, you should offer to pay me. Do you have any idea the amount of work that will go into organizing the house? It's gone to such seed over the last, 2 decades?
Harry nodded.
Yes, well.
Malfoy lifted his shoulders, negligently debonair. He leaned against Harry's sofa as if he owned it, and Harry tried not to grind his own teeth into dust.
What's your main problem with it anyway? It won't adapt to Wizarding Space Editions or follow for updates to the plumbing?
He looked around, the edge of a sneer caught on his face.
Won't allow you to redecorate?
Harry frowned.
It locks me out of things, and, trips me sometimes.
Uncrossing his legs, Malfoy blinked at him and sat back up.
But you're its master. Apparently it doesn't think so.
Harry muttered, aggravated.
It doesn't have to, Potter. That's the way things go. If Creature obeys you the house, he's bound to, must know it belongs to you from the eaves to the foundation.
Malfoy said, still shocked.
Right.
Harry relaxed a little.
Creature said it couldn't really hurt me, but that certain circumstances might dictate that it could express its displeasure with me in other ways. Only something about house elf magic dictates that he's not allowed to explain it to me.
The house is seeking attentions,
Creature said mysteriously. Harry and Draco ignored him when he didn't go on.
What ways? Malfoy asked suspiciously.
Harry picked up a cracker to store. He smeared it with a touch of seasoned cheese and ate it, chewing slowly. By the time he'd swallowed, Malfoy's narrow look had faded into one of amusement. That was somehow worse.
It...
Harry blew out a hard breath.
It locks me out of the bathrooms. The banister shoot splinters sometimes when my hand is on it. The cupboards rearrange themselves so I can't find anything. The floor tilts randomly and knocks me off the center, and I basically have to bother Creature any time I want something to eat, even if I've just bought groceries. They just vanish to who knows where. Only Creature's able to access them.
You haven't taken control as master yet?
Malfoy said thoughtfully.
Have you?
Bewildered, Harry shook his head.
My name is on the deed. I have the keys and Creature sees me as the heir to the property. What else am I supposed to do?
Malfoy snorted.
Many thanks, Potter. You are incredibly fortunate I'm even willing to live in this tomb for a year, let alone possibly longer.
A year?
Harry asked blankly.
Longer?
Well, I'm certainly not going to have you toss me out when you've gotten what you want from me, am I?
Malfoy said smoothly.
So a month-to-month lease won't do. A year should do, although I have plans to move again before then, so I'll need the option to break the lease as soon as I have the need. Conditional, of course,
he added, anticipating Harry's objection,
on having fulfilled my part of the agreement as well.
Stuck on the phrase, "what you want from me," it took Harry a moment to respond.
Fine, I guess. A year, longer, whatever, if you help me with Grimmauld.
Malfoy's eyes gleamed at him, and he nodded.
For room and board, he said. I'm not spending a nut on this place.
Hey, it seemed to like you just fine,
Harry said, only slightly put out. The house had seemed to open up when Malfoy had stepped in with him, the rooms brightening infinitesimally. Even all of the bathroom had remained unlocked so Harry could show them to him.
It recognized the blood association.
Malfoy carded a hand through his hair. He sounded vaguely disconcerted by the prospect.
Creature frowned.
He opened his mouth, then promptly shut it. Harry started to ask why, but it was interrupted when Malfoy said,
"So then we're agreed. I can't imagine you need the gold anyway. Why is that even part of the bargain?"
So frowning, Creature disapparated.
Hermione's idea,
Harry explained with a sigh.
to make sure that the applicants would be,
he grimaced,
contributing members of society or something. She explained it better. But you're right, I don't care. I have a pet,
Malfoy said abruptly. Harry looked at him, startled.
I threw away a lot of applications from people with pets, he said carefully. I didn't know what the house would do to it if it got annoyed. I'm not sure it would be smart. Is there anyone who can take care of it for you? It's mine,
Malfoy said, frowning.
I'll take care of it. This is non-negotiable, Potter.
Flustered as Malfoy's fervent declaration towards his pet, he seemed so earnest, something Harry hadn't been aware Malfoy could be. Harry narrowed his eyes.
Apparently you need me just as much as I need you, he said. Nothing isn't up for negotiation. What is it, now?
Malfoy pursed his lips.
Your house likes me just fine. You just said it. And it's a magical tortoise, very well behaved. The house won't mind,
he added confidently.
I've never heard of a magical turtle,
Harry said, thrown.
What does it do? Never mind, yes or no?
Malfoy inched closer to the edge of the couch, as though ready to get up and walk out.
Yes,
Harry sighed. He scraped his hair back from his face and adjusted his glasses, pinning Malfoy with a look.
But if something happens to it, I'll take the responsibility.
Looking pleased, Malfoy spent a moment hovering over the snack tray, selecting things to put on his plate. He spread several crackers with the same cheese Harry had chosen, and had bits of melon and a few extra grapes. He already seemed completely at home, and Harry had to repress another sigh when Malfoy looked up and smirked.
About those negotiations.
He bit into a cracker, dusting off a stray crumb that fell onto his chest. Immediately on guard, Harry sat back and folded his arms over his chest.
Free room and board,
he said, pointedly looking at Malfoy's full plate.
And a pet and a better reputation. What else could you possibly want from me?
Malfoy coughed slightly. He thumped his chest with his fist to clear whatever had gone down the wrong way, his cheeks going bright pink as he reached for a glass of water and took a long gulp. Sucking in a breath, when he was finished, he met Harry's eyes again. He gestured to the French doors of the sitting room.
You have a garden?
Harry nodded, brows knitting.
And you have plenty of space,
Malfoy continued, looking finally strangely hesitant to go on.
I do,
Harry agreed cautiously.
I'll need another room for potions,
Malfoy said. His jaw was tight, and he stared down at his plate, fingers stroking the porcelain rim of it.
And as you obviously have no use for them, I like to harvest some of the ingredients from the garden and to be able to bring in my own.
Harry chuckled, surprising them both. Malfoy looked offended, and Harry shook his head.
No, it's just, you were literally the only applicant who hadn't asked for extra space of their own.
After fading, Harry grinned.
I was a little disappointed in you. Might as well see what I can get out of you,
Malfoy said lightly, face relaxing. He tipped Harry a glance that felt almost mischievous, and Harry blinked at him for a second.
Slytherin after all. Right.
Harry looked out to the garden thoughtfully.
You can't hurt anything out there. I wouldn't,
Malfoy said quickly. He swallowed tensely.
Then I don't really care, Harry admitted. And you can take any of the bedrooms other than mine for potions, or the basement even. There's a good space down there.
Nodding, Malfoy reached up and brushed back a stray lock of hair with his pinky. He seemed relieved for some reason. Harry wanted to ask why, but didn't. Things were going well, and he didn't want to risk altering their comfortable level of antagonism into something darker.
Thank you,
Malfoy said, strangely subdued. He ate another cracker almost listlessly, then cleared his throat.
But visitors?
Harry made a face.
No parties or anything without me agreeing first?
Thought about it for a moment.
all being really loud, really late.
What constitutes a party? A few friends coming over? Malfoy asked. And the being loud late, does that only pertain to parties?
What else could it? Oh!
Harry flushed. One side of Malfoy's mouth lifted. Suddenly uncomfortable for no reason, he wanted to examine. Harry gave a nod that apparently didn't look much like one. Malfoy stared at him, confused. Harry forced his head to bob.
Yeah, that's, fine. Selling charms, though, if you're, loud. And if there are strangers, you have to be careful. I don't want people coming over just to gawk at me.
Harry said quietly.
A few friends coming over should be fine.
Fair enough,
Malfoy said. He tilted his head to the side, looking closely at Harry. Harry shifted again, wondering what was so bloody fascinating. He ran his tongue over the front of his teeth to see if he could feel any strange food caught in them.
Anything you'd like from me?
Harry swallowed.
I can't think of anything offhand. No, he said. I mean, no dark magic.
He said, wondering exactly how over it he was if he felt the need to say so. Malfoy snorted, waving a hand as though to say, obviously.
And no talking about me. Even when people find out we're housing together, I expect you to be discreet about my personal life. If I see something in the papers about myself, I'll know you put it there.
Harry added seriously.
And I'll put something in the rental contract that says as much.
A binding non-disclosure agreement?
Malfoy supplied smoothly.
That's better than fine. Perfect, actually. I'll admit I'd prefer conjecture over fact considering. Although I wonder what you could possibly have been getting up to around here that's interesting enough to merit a discussion with the press.
He sighed, glancing around again.
And progress, Harry added firmly, on the house. If it doesn't start responding to me better, you're either out or you start paying rent. I don't care if I don't need your gourd.
Wonderfully petty of you,
Malfoy said, arching an eyebrow in an admiring sort of way. Harry shrugged.
Take it or leave it.
I'll take it,
Malfoy said instantly. Harry looked at him, startled at the speed with which it had all been accomplished. They sat in silence for a few minutes, eating and darting wary glances at each other. When Malfoy's plate was empty, Harry set his own aside and ran his hand along the tops of his thighs to steady himself. He took a deep breath, determined to alleviate some of the tension. They'd be living together, after all.
So, where have you been staying? I heard the manor.
He broke off. Malfoy's face shuttered.
Was taken for reparations, yes,
he said after a pause. Not the best topic to have settled on, Harry decided with a mental wince. Then Malfoy rotated his neck from side to side, his narrow chest expanding against his robes. His face cleared a little.
We have properties in France and Italy, of course, one in Japan, but I choose to stay here. Pansy and I've been staying with her,
he said stiffly.
And just so you're aware, she is one of the friends I mentioned who will be visiting, so if you have any problems with that, you should say so now.
Harry held up his hand in a placating gesture.
Well, I just wondered. I don't care about Parkinson one way or another,
he said. His voice lowered of its own accord as he met Malfoy's eyes.
It was just one of a lot of stupid things that a lot of stupid kids did during the war.
The silence that met his statement was so profound, Harry could have sworn he heard his and Malfoy's heartbeats, both. Malfoy examined him, obviously searching for some lingering resentment or artifice. Honestly, Harry wished he'd still feel it sometimes, but he'd spent too much time by himself thinking about the events of those last years at Hogwarts and the events surrounding to hold on to bitterness. If he could forgive, or at least try to understand Dumbledore, he could bloody well got off his high horse about Pansy Parkinson, and maybe even about Draco Malfoy. Harry sighed, meeting Malfoy's eyes again. He sat rigidly in his spot, no longer with the relaxed descendants of his earlier pose when he seemed ready to take on the mantle as master of the house. His hands were loosely curled, long pale fingers folded under, and he was watching Harry closely.
Really?
Harry said softly.
She's welcome here if you want her, as long as you two make sure to shut the fuck up after midnight.
Malfoy huffed a surprised laugh, mouth curving into something genuinely amused, though at Harry's sentiment or language he couldn't be sure.
Have big plans then, Potter?
Malfoy drawled.
Harry rolled his eyes. Sleep, usually. But if Parkinson's going to be spending the night, he said that thing about, fucking no.
Malfoy said, inexplicably revolted for someone who just so strenuously defended his relationship with her.
I thought, since you were living with her, Ginny and I went through the same thing before we broke up, just needing to be away.
Harry offered, curious. Malfoy was still shaking his head.
Ah, yes, the golden couple,
he said with a wry twist to his lips.
I don't generally believe the papers anymore, but I happen to see Lovegood from time to time, so I'll extend my deepest sympathies to you. Apparently you're still grieving over it, or so the prophet says. Completely.
Harry assured him, smirking. His eye skimmed up the lean line of Malfoy, from the reflective shine on his supple black shoes to the shoulders, which were slightly broader than they'd been the last time Harry had seen him. The difference in Malfoy that had eluded him before finally clicked. He was still lanky as ever, but had somehow filled out. His jaw had squared off a bit. His nose and chin were still pointy, but he looked like a man now. Harry drew his eyes up further and took in Malfoy's face, which had gone strangely alert during Harry's unconscious perusal of him. Their eyes locked for a long moment, and Harry felt a spark of something that he'd never thought to associate directly with Malfoy before. Malfoy seemed intrigued, bewildered, and just a tiny bit lost. Harry's voice came out husky when he asked,
"Why the note on Parkinson, then?"
The silence stretched out between them elastically. Harry felt the throb of his heart in every pulse point in his body, throat, wrists, ears, groin. Malfoy's Adam's apple bobbed above the collar of his robes, his throat long and pale.
"Not my type,"
he said inscrutably.
"Oh."
Harry desperately wanted to ask what Malfoy's type was. He was starting to wonder if his own penchant for blonde men might have a relevant basis, and the question was pressed against the back of his teeth, about to topple off his tongue clumsily, when Creature appeared between them with a soft pop. Harry exhaled too loudly, relieved. Because wouldn't that be a fucking disaster?
"Aye, Creature,"
Harry croaked out. Malfoy made a stifled sound of assent, a little of greeting towards Creature. I realized Malfoy's gently curled fingers had pulled up tight, and he looked down at his own hands, which had rested lightly on his thighs before that strange moment. They were now gripping them, fingers sinking into the tense muscles beneath the denim of his jeans. Harry willed them to loosen, and after a second they did. Creature cleared the trays and plates, then looked at Harry with a much softer scowl than he usually wore. It meant he approved of something.
"Well, Master Harry be having his guest over for dinner as well. Is he being Master Harry's new
housemate, yeah? Just my new housemate."
Harry rushed out. He glanced at Malfoy again, who was staring at the wall behind Harry, eyes wide and unmoving, as if he didn't know where to put them. A flush rode high on his cheekbones, but he'd obviously heard the question and Harry's answer because he gave a jerky little nod.
"I can't stay. Thank you, Creature,"
he said, voice uneven.
"Potter, when will you have the tenancy agreement drawn up?" "My solicitor can have it by this weekend,"
Harry said, still talking too fast.
"Well, so nephew, this weekend is fine,"
Malfoy said. His gaze dropped from the wall and he stood up promptly, glancing at Harry for a fraction of a second before dipping his chin to look down at Creature.
"Where's the door? You haven't been able to unlock it for him?"
Creature's huge, roomy eyes shone briefly at being addressed.
"No, sir, Master Malfoy. Creature's not being able to unlock the door when it is not revealing itself to Master Harry yet,"
he explained in a most incomprehensible dour tone. It was at complete odds with the expression of a near rapture on his wizened face.
"What door?"
Harry asked. He stood too, feeling at a sudden disadvantage, and stuffed his hands into his pockets.
"It hasn't even shown itself,"
Malfoy asked with a sneer. He tsked under his breath.
Of course it hasn't. What door?
Harry demanded again, trying not to scowl. Malfoy finally looked back up at him, face haughty and composed as ever, and Harry wondered if he'd imagined what had happened, or had almost happened, or had seemed about to happen, or something.
I'll explain once I move in,
he said briefly, eyes glittering like a freshly sharpened blade. Harry's jaw tightened.
Fine,
he clipped out. Malfoy hesitated, then stepped forward, closing the distance between them.
A wizard's agreement, then,
he said. His hand came up slowly, palm flat and fingers outstretched. Harry looked down at it, disoriented. He remembered a boy on a train 10 years prior. Remembered his own reaction to that hand. Harry took it. Malfoy's fingers curled around his hand and gave it 2 brief, sterile pumps. His palm was warm and not entirely dry, but not unpleasantly damp either. Harry tightened his grip, letting Malfoy direct the handshake. He felt a tingle of Malfoy's magic meet his own as the loose terms of wizard's agreement. Harry's first bound their hands and brightened them for a moment. Malfoy released Harry with a brisk nod.
Do you need to use the flute to get home?
Harry asked, taking a step back just as Malfoy did.
Pansy doesn't have one. I need to be somewhere at any rate. It's nearby,
Malfoy said absently. He rubbed at his own jaw for a second, fingers lingering there thoughtfully.
I'll meet the agreement once it's drawn up.
Yeah, Harry said. Malfoy gave him another stilted nod, then strode out of the sitting room without so much as a goodbye. Harry looked down at Creature, who seemed disappointed, damn him.
What door?
Creature grimaced, tugging at his ear.
Even if Master is ordering Creature to explain, Creature cannot,
he said cagily.
Creature is being ordered not to iron his hands, so Creature is not knowing what to do for defying Master.
Harry sighed.
I'll let Malfoy explain it,
he said. Creature nodded, fervently grateful, then disappeared with another quiet pop, just as Harry heard the front door open and close. The heavy drapes unbound themselves in front of the French doors, blocking out the sun, and the fire and lamps all went out at once. Harry pinched the bridge of his nose, standing in inky darkness.
Well, fuck.
To be continued. Welcome to the new Drarry story on this channel. I'm super excited to read this wonderful story by bixgirl1, The Claiming of Grimmauld Place, and I hope you all are just as excited as I am. I'm trying to update regularly, but as you know, life sometimes comes in the way, but please know I'm trying my hardest, and I hope you stick around for the next part of this first chapter. I can't wait to show you more. And as always, if you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.